Good evening, everybody. It's 6:30. Welcome to everyone to this meeting of the Health and Environment Policy Committee, taking place from the Walton Suite in the Guildhall at Winchester. My name's Jerry Pett. I'm a Winchester City Councillor and Chair of this committee. The meeting's being live streamed and recorded to the Council's YouTube channel. Could I ask you to ensure that mobile phones are on silent, please, or better still, switched off? In the unlikely event that it's necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound, and if that were to occur, please follow all the instructions given to you by our team. Can I welcome members of the public to the meeting? Well, member singular of the public to the meeting. Mr. Tate, I'll invite you to come forward when it's time to make your contribution, and as we've already discussed, we'll do that before each of the presentations rather than up front. So, turning to the agenda, first of all, apologies and deputy members.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Apologies for Councillor Westwood, Deputy Member Councillor Eve here this evening. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So, Councillor Eve, thank you for deputising. Welcome. Declarations of interest. Does anybody else have a declaration of interest? Councillor Lee.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to say I'm a trustee at WINAC. I don't think there's anything on the agenda that would raise any issues, but if there are any, of course, I'll take appropriate action. Thank you.
Thank you. And I have to make my standard declaration that I have a disclosable pecuniary interest in respect of items on the agenda due to being a member of the South Downs National Park Authority. However, there's no material conflict of interest regarding these issues, as I have a dispensation granted by the monitoring officer that enables me to speak and vote on them. Okay, the only announcement I have is that when we get to the end of the agenda, I will be speaking briefly about some working parties that we might set up informally. We'll come to that later on. Minutes of the last meeting. So that's agenda item 4. Any questions on minutes of the last meeting? Councillor Lee.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think the issues that I had some concerns about were addressed, and that some of the points raised at the previous HEP may have been missed in the minutes, but I think those have been rectified as I see it being followed through to Cabinet. So I'm happy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Would you still wish for the minutes to be amended at all to reflect the ecosystem services comments you made? Or are you happy that it's gone to Cabinet?
I think it's moved on, and the appropriate information is in the public domain as to what is the proper record, albeit probably elsewhere. So I think
okay. Thank you.
I'm very happy just to add a few words at that point on the agenda, Mr. Chair, just to address that matter.
Okay. So can we take the minutes for the last meeting as agreed? Agreed. Thank you. So then we come to the next item on the agenda, which is the Future of Waste project and a presentation from our responsible officer. But first of all, Mr. Tate, do you want to, at this point, come and address the committee? I think you know the rules.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to speak at this committee. I am a keen recycler, and I'm always very frustrated when I have to place plastic or other what I consider recyclable items in the general waste bin, as Winchester currently seems to me to have a pretty limited availability of items that can be recycled. I always take my Tetra Pak cartons and similar items to the cattle market recycling point, and I would do the same with most of my other recyclable rubbish if facilities were available. My home is a collection point for aluminium to support the air ambulance, so people bring their items to my property. As a single person, I create very little food waste, so I wonder if the new service is really that necessary in terms of recycling priorities. Appreciate it's in place for that. Why couldn't the council widen the range of plastic and other items that could be recycled? I seem to produce far more of that type of rubbish than I ever do food waste. The presentation mentions the anaerobic digestion plants, and I was intrigued to hear from a farmer friend of mine that recently that he had a contract to transport maize across Winchester, across the Winchester district, through the city centre to the new 3 Maize anaerobic digestion facility. He calculated that he was using 200 litres of diesel a day on that route. I note that 30% of maize production in this country goes to anaerobic digesters, but there we are, that's another subject. The fact that many tractors drive through central Winchester to get to 3 Maize doesn't help with air quality, another paper on the agenda. I do an increasing amount of work in the hospitality sector for restaurants and other food outlets, and it always alarms me at the amount of food waste that they produce. Having read through the report, and I confess some ignorance here, I'm assuming that the new service will not be available to restaurants and other smaller food retailers who currently often just dispose of their out-of-date food and uneaten meals in the general waste bins, many of which are behind Ask Pizza in the yard, the bane of my life, the yard in St George's Street. So those are my comments. Although I wish the scheme well, I wonder if it's possibly missing a more important point. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Tate. Councillor Croyson, as the portfolio holder, do you want to take the opportunity now to answer any of those, or should we move straight to the presentation?
Sorry, yes, thank you, Chair. Well, I think our presentation will cover some of those items, but perhaps not all of them. By way of introducing the actual presentation, this follows on from the members' briefing, which was held in private, so all councillors should actually be aware of most of this. And presenting it here is intended to create the opportunity for members in a public forum to be able to ask what they think are the most salient questions for the district as a whole and for their wards in particular, because we all live in slightly different types of environments, some in the city, some out in rural areas. So that was the purpose of this meeting, and to get those questions and get that feedback and opinion will allow us to look at the programme that we've already got implemented or already started. In fact, the bins have started going out this week, and we've seen them on some people's drives. So Campbell will get to that, but I just thought maybe I could just take I'll take a semi-informed opinion on some of these. So Mr. Tate, you've made some good points in there, and I think it is useful to hear those. I think we have to realise that we are a collections authority, and that we work in tandem with a disposal authority in the shape of the county council. So whatever we do, there are constraints placed on us as a council based on what the disposal authority can do. Now, those constraints are not necessarily always 100% hard constraints, but getting around those constraints can be extraordinarily expensive. So some of the things we would like to do don't necessarily come for free. In fact, don't come for free. I can be pretty sure of that. Now, I'm pleased that Mr. Tate takes his Tetra Paks to the capital market. That's great. I do the same when I'm passing by. We look forward to the time when that will be able to go out in our standard bins. I'm also very delighted that he's a collection point for aluminium. I am not a collection point, but we do take our aluminium to an air ambulance collection point, so that's great. Now, is food waste really the priority? I think these things need to be seen as like a roadmap, and we as a council have been working with the county council for a good number of years and we participate in something called Project Integrate. And I apologise, Campbell, if I'm covering some of the ground you will cover. And that's if you like a partnership to develop a plan for improving our overall waste collections going forward. And plastics is very high on the priority list. So a lot of our residents, and indeed my wife, are very frustrated about the amount of plastics that we currently can't put into our green waste bin. But in terms of how Project Integra works, one of the things you've got to think about doing is you've got to prioritise what you do and how you roll it out. If you try and do too many changes all in one go, you will end up getting chaos because you will not have the full buy-in of all our residents across our fairly widespread district, and we've seen some very well publicised reports about various things going on in the New Forest, not just about the ponies knocking over the bins, but just in terms of the practicality of keeping control and managing the rollout of their plan, where they've tried to go very big bang and roll out an awful lot. There's all sorts of risks when you go big bang. There's risks when you make any change, particularly when it comes to getting public engagement. So I hear it would be great to have done plastic as well, but that has very significant implications as to the rollout of the overall big picture plan. Food waste is something, and to be fair, and also what I should say, and this I suspect Campbell will cover, we're also guided by legislation. Now, legislation is in place that actually requires this council to be collecting food waste by next April. So we've had a plan in place. We're rolling it out. We're ahead of many councils. So, for an example, one of the key things you need to invest in if you want to do food waste is you need to invest in a bunch of trucks. So we have 9 trucks. They're all down at Bar End. They're waiting to get going. Some councils haven't even placed the order. So there's a lot of moving parts, or some might say stationary parts in this case, that we've had to put in place in order to make sure that this council is ahead of the curve, can get its food waste collections rolled out by the deadline set by legislation. So there's good reasons for why we are focusing on food waste. I think I'm in danger of covering some of the material that Campbell is going to cover. So what I'll do is I'll hand over to Campbell, who can talk us through some of the changes that are going on outside of our control in terms of legislation, in terms of the work that through Project Integra, Hampshire County Council are doing that will ultimately enable us to be able to do things like plastics, and which will then affect the rollout of our programmes to do the collections. And I would very much welcome questions from members about that presentation, or indeed any points that Mr. Tate has raised that I've not covered off. So I will hand over to Campbell and leave it with you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cremoisen. Yes, so my name is Campbell Williams. I'm the Corporate Head of Service for Place at the City Council. I'm going to take you through some slides which are going to cover, to start off with, some of the big picture stuff that is happening across the country, how that's impacting the rollout of our food waste service, and how some of the things which are going to hit us very shortly, will also impact us, and particularly about a thing called extended producer responsibility. So if you look at a bit of a timeline and a pipeline of what's coming up, we are in about 2025. Not much has changed for quite a long time. But the Environment Act, which was passed, I think, in 2021, has set in train a whole range of things which are starting to impact us. So extended producer responsibility, which I'll talk about shortly, has started, and that's where packaging producers are responsible for the cost of the disposal or recycling of all packaging. We've got simpler recycling starting in 2026, which is when we're due, as all English local authorities, to start collecting food waste and separate the collection of paper and card. Simpler recycling also has impacted commercial waste collection, and from the 1st of April this year, 2025, food waste and recycling was required to be collected from all commercial properties, including those in Winchester. And if you walk around Winchester now, you will see food waste bins and recycling bins outside or inside commercial properties. And there's a whole range of things happening. Some of the things which are really going to impact us in Winchester are a deposit return scheme, which is scheduled to start across England and Wales in October 2027. And that's for all takeaway drinks containers, like the plastic bottles on the table, from 50 millilitres up to 3 litres, which would have to go back to a deposit return point and have a deposit charged on them, which you would get back. And the new material recycling facility, which at the moment our recycling goes to 2 material recycling plants, which were set up in the early 1990s, one in Portsmouth, one in Alton on the A31. And in late 2027, early 2028, the County Council is due to open a new plant, single plant, in the centre of Eastleigh at Chickenhall Lane, which would take a wider range of materials. And as part of the government's direction, we'd also need to really separate out paper and card from that, but collect a wider range of materials. So pots, tubs, trays, cartons, flexible and film plastics would start to be collected from that point, which, having been involved in waste management for longer than I care to remember, should answer the question of when can I recycle my yogurt pots. So it should be about the start of 2028, all things going well. There's also a number of other things which are really important in terms of finances. So a lot of jobs are likely to be created, a lot of investment. And from an overall point of view, there's a thing called the UK Emissions Trading Scheme, which is similar to landfill tax in the sense that there's going to be a tax introduced for energy from waste facilities and incineration, so that the cost of that would go up. So that means that the more you recycle as a local authority, and if you go forward 3 years, we might be part of a local authority which has responsibility for the whole of the waste system. All of a sudden, if you can stop producing residual waste and taking that to incineration, you might save a lot of money. So a huge amount of stuff which is happening, and we're right at the start now. But as Councillor Croyson said, we're on a pipeline, and those of you who were here about 6 months ago, 8 months ago, I talked about the reroute of our waste collections, which, with the help of the members who are here, went very smoothly, and we've rerouted all our waste collections, which has taken off about 13,000 miles of transport and quite a lot of carbon. But it's put us in a position where, when we roll out these new services, we're already ready to do that. So we're going to start recycling food waste, and there's a number of reasons for this. As Councillor Croyson said, we have legislation that requires food waste collection services to be in place for all residential properties, including communal properties, by the 1st of April 2026. And one of the reasons we want to do this, and we want to do this well, and we want to do this at that time, is because it really tracks with our, as a council, commitment to reduce carbon emissions, to increase recycling rates, and to reduce waste. It's quite surprising, but we do quite a lot of waste analysis, and across Hampshire, about a quarter to a third of the residual waste is food waste of various types and others. So there's quite a lot of it, actually. And so what it will do is support our Going Greener Faster objectives, It will reduce carbon emissions, and it will increase the production of sustainable energy. And you can see at the bottom the first picture of one of our new waste collection trucks, which Councillor Knoyson said we've now got 9 of those in our depot. So we're not doing this also without having engaged with people. And those of you who were here a couple of years ago, we did a consultation in October 2023, which had over 8,000 responses. We asked about food waste, we asked about how people recycle, how full their bins are, what the difficulties they are, what they think is really important. And we had some really positive results. And what we're doing with Simply Recycling and the introduction of food waste is responding to those, and introducing new food waste collections will give people a wider range of materials which people wanted to do. And we're working hard on communications to make it really clear what you can recycle at home. I got my new calendar quite recently, which had in it a leaflet about food waste, and on the back of that was a really helpful leaflet about what you can and can't recycle, set out really clearly. I struggled usually with my children to say this is what goes in that bin, but that was really helpful. So we are really trying quite hard to engage with people to tell them what can go where. So as I said, we're offering this to all residential properties across the district. So there's about 60,000 properties in all, and that includes HMOs and communal properties and flats. No one is having their bin day changed, so they're all staying on exactly the same bin day, and everyone's food waste bin is being collected on a weekly basis on their usual bin collection day. So if you have an alternate weekly collection with a residual bin one week and a recycling bin the next week, every time you put a bin out, you can put your food waste bin out as well. If you are one of the people who get an assisted collection, and we offer an assisted collection to people who aren't able to put their bins out, this would also occur with the food waste bins, so you don't have to do anything different if you've got a food waste bin. And you can recycle a wide range of food waste. So there's some pictures up on the screen of food waste, and things like bread is wasted a lot. Huge amounts of research go into things like salad. A lot of salad is wasted because it goes off. Eggshells, tea bags, meat, fish, bones, they can all go in the food waste, as long as it's not a cow's leg and it won't fit in. It can go in the food waste. So pretty much all the food waste can go in there. I think one of the things I'm anticipating the questions at Christmas, can I put my turkey carcass in the food waste bin? That's something we'll have to sort out. But I think pretty much all food will be able to go in there. And the system we're operating is this very, very similar to other systems which have operated around England for some time. So Eastleigh have a food waste collection, some of Portsmouth has a food waste collection, Rushmore has a food waste collection in Hampshire, and this is very similar to those systems indeed. So we have now got some food waste trucks. So these are currently located down at the depot. We've got 9 of these. So we have 7 food waste rounds. And as I said, we've done the reroute of our waste rounds to minimise the amount of fuel used. So this will fit onto the back of that round nicely. There will be 2 vehicles going round, one to pick up your normal bin and one to pick up the food waste bins. So we've been working with Biffa, our contractors, to get the drivers and the crews trained up, which has happened over the last few months, and we're introducing these. And these lorries will go around to each house. They'll pick up the food waste bins, they'll put them in the back of the truck, and they'll put the food waste bins back on the curbside where they came from. And they will then go to, and these trucks each take about up to 4 tons in capacity. And they will then go back to the transfer station, where in the majority it will be Poles Lane in Otterbourne, where some of you will know, where the waste will be tipped into an enclosed container, and then it will be transported in a larger container by Hampshire County Council as the Waste Disposal Authority to the anaerobic digestion plant, and I'll talk about where that is in a minute. Once it's gone to the anaerobic digestion plant, it's turned into green gas, and that gas goes back into the national grid, and it gets turned back into fertiliser, which gets spread back on the fields around where the plant is. These trucks, in common with all our other Waste trucks are fueled by hydro-treated vegetable oil, which produces a significant amount less of carbon emissions. And as with the other HVO oil we use, that will also come with the suitable accreditations to make sure that it is the right type of HVO from the right place. So that's really important for us. So here's a picture of the anaerobic digestion plant that it will start going to, and just to sort of explain the process a little bit at the moment. And this is alongside where we are going to be going. It's alongside a place that produces energy from maize crops. So essentially the lorries will drive in from Otterbourne in a sort of articulated lorry along the road at the bottom, and you can just see a lorry at the bottom, and we'll go into the green shed on the middle left hand side, where the waste gets tipped out onto a tipping floor. It then gets put into a large sieve essentially, and the bags which are contained within the food waste get split out, and they go off to be incinerated, and the remaining material goes into a pipe, and it goes into one of the two covered domes on the left hand side, and the material then sits there for an average of 50 days. And what the people who work at the plant do is they control the amount of material in there, and the domes which are there, which are basically big balloons, go up and down depending upon how much gas is produced. And when the gas reaches a certain level through the anaerobic digestion, the gas is drawn off into containers, and it is then put into a lorry, and the lorry drives it to a place not too far away where it can go directly into the national grid as a replacement for sort of fossil fuels. So that's really good. The gas gets taken off, and then what's left over, which is the digestate at the bottom, then gets spread on the fields locally in the open air, which supports the farmer whose land it's on in the first place. So that's one of the plants. There's another one which we'll be going to, and as I say, that's up to Hampshire County Council who manage that disposal part. But there's another plant which is the other side of Hampshire in Dorset. This one is just outside Basingstoke, so it's about 15 miles from here. So in terms of our timeline, it's now getting really exciting, because we started distributing the bins on Monday, and we have 7 collection rounds which we're introducing in phases from we started distributing the bins on Monday, and we're going until March. And essentially what's happening is for 3 weeks we are delivering the bins to residents and communal properties on the first of those 7 rounds, and then on the 3rd week they will start being collected. So on the 4th week they'll start being collected, and then they will be collected every week on an ongoing basis from those. Once that round has started, we'll then start the 2nd of those 7 rounds and start distributing those bins. So it's a 3-weekly cycle where we're distributing the bins and start the service, and then start the next one and go so forth. And that means that between the 6th of October, which is the first round, will actually start collection, and the 12th of December, we're going to do 4 rounds before Christmas. We're going to stop over Christmas because in our experience, don't do anything complex over Christmas with waste, because a lot of it gets produced. And we'll start again in February and go up to March. So we did a members briefing earlier in the week, so all the members should have a pack of information which sets out which rounds are going when, which includes which roads are going when, and there is a lookup on the website which works now, which you're able to look up and see when your house is going. So I live in Winchester. I'm going in February. I'm a bit annoyed about because I want to start early, but there we go. So all that information is out there, and what's really interesting is, because we've done quite a lot of communication on this, I mentioned the calendars which have gone out, we're getting now quite a lot of hits on our website. Since we launched the website about food waste and put information up there, and there's lots of frequently asked questions, there's lots of information. We're getting about 100 visits a day into it from people across Winchester, which is really good. So if people have questions, point them towards our website where there are frequently asked questions, and that will be the most sensible thing to do. So a lot of this I've just talked through, but yes, we've done the website, we're doing social media and press releases, we're working with the parish councils to get the information available. In my experience, one of the most important things is members who are really helpful in this sort of stuff in terms of being in touch with their residents. That's been really helpful before, and I think that will work again. We've got a couple of recycling officers who are out and about in Winchester at the moment. They're focusing on communal properties, including flats and houses of multiple occupation initially, to make sure that the signage and the materials in those are really clear and up to date, so they know what they're doing. And we're also, as we do this, as I mentioned before, there is a role for businesses across Winchester to do this as well. So we're helping to promote and make businesses aware of that. So you can see they are starting to do that. So there's a lot going on in terms of getting the service out and about. So what you want to know is, what will you actually get as a resident? And this tries to set that out. So you will get a 23 litre outside curbside bin, which is about that big, and a 5 litre kitchen caddy, which sits inside it when you get it. And also inside is an information leaflet telling you when you're starting and what you can compost, and a set of compostable caddy liners. If you live in a communal property, you get everything the same as that, but you don't get an individual curbside bin. You get a 140 litre communal property, which you share with the other residents in your block. That communal bin is black with an orange lid, so it really stands out. It's labelled food waste, and every time that BIFA come to collect that communal bin, they are supposed to be changing the bag inside there, because otherwise for a communal property it might get quite unpleasant. In terms of how this works as a resident, the compostable caddy liners, you put that in your kitchen caddy, in your kitchen, put the food waste in there. When that caddy is full, you tie that off, you take that and put that in the outside bin. You don't need to put a bag in the outside bin, you can just put the bag from the caddy liner in there, and the crew will then pick that up. We don't want loose food waste in there, because the crews really don't want to be getting all sorts of food waste splashed back onto them. There's all sorts of risks of diseases and those sorts of things being carried. So these caddy liners are compostable, and yeah, they go in the kitchen caddy, which then goes in the compostable, that then goes in the bigger bin. So the members information pack, which you've all had, and there's a huge amount of information on our website as well. Hopefully you've had a look through there. If you've got any questions, really happy to get some feedback on those. If you have residents who have any questions, do let us know. There's email addresses on there to contact us, or you can phone our customer service centre in the first instance, and there's a lot of information on there. And what people probably want to know is, when am I starting? So you can say, you can look up and it tells you now, or you can tell them because we've sent the information out. So just as a very simple prompt, here are some of the locations where we're starting, and what this does is it shows how we rerouted things as well. So on a Monday, all the collections are in the sort of Denmead, south of Winchester area. On a Tuesday, all the collections are around Winchester. On a Wednesday, they're all in the same place. So you might find that areas are getting things done in different times if they're really close together, but that's not to be unexpected. So that's online, and you can have a look at that as well. And so you've got all the schedules set out in there. I've also got some maps just for the first week, so you can see who's getting maps. So some of you might know people who've already received bins, some of you might not be anywhere near that. So I've got some maps which are on the slides, which show you the individual properties which will be getting food waste bins. So we're delivering 9,112 bins in the first 3 weeks. We've done it for 3 days, and we're on track at the moment to deliver them. They're all going out at the right time. What we're all hoping is, it was really windy on Monday. We were hoping it's really not that windy going forward, because it might blow the bins down the streets. That was a problem on Monday, but we're on track at the moment to deliver those 9,112 bins on time. So that was food waste, and we're on track to do that. We are doing this. We're going to be, everyone will have a food waste service by the end of March, which will meet the government's deadline. Other local authorities around us are doing this at the same time. Test Valley, as an example, are starting on Monday with every property in Test Valley. So they're going in a big bang. We're doing this on a phased basis. So what this should do is increase our recycling rate by around 10%. It should reduce the amount of residual waste that goes to incineration by a significant amount, and it should be really good for our overall objective of meeting carbon neutrality as the council as a whole. So really positive thing going forward. The survey said people want this to happen. It's starting to happen, and it's all underway. So happy to take food waste questions now, but I've also got a few slides on extended producer responsibility which I wanted to talk through as well. So can I either do that now or go back to the next set of slides?
Should we do questions on food waste now and then carry on? Members? Councillor Ruffy.
So I guess the question is, the food waste bins that people receive, are they the responsibility and the property of the resident? And therefore, if they get damaged, will the resident have to pay to replace them? Is that particularly punitive, and are these particularly durable? I'm thinking possibly, wincing internally at the way that I've seen my glass recycling bin lobbed on the floor and noticing how smashed up it is and thinking, oh, is that something I have to pay for? I mean, ultimately, are we handing this to people and it's their property, but then making our contractor BIFA responsible for the care of it when it's on the street? And how do we manage that?
Okay, so as I said, a lot of local authorities currently run this service, and there are standard specifications for these bins. So the bins we're buying meet the standard specifications, and BIFA, one of the advantages of working with BIFA is that they've done this elsewhere many times, and so the bins which we've got should be durable enough that they don't break on a regular basis. If they do break, and we're expecting some to be faulty or some handles to fall off very early on and those sorts of things, so we're anticipating we'll replace some of them. We're in a slightly tricky situation because this is due to be funded by the government. We don't know and haven't been told, and nobody knows how much money we're getting for food waste recycling as of yet. So we've got some anticipations in the budget. So we haven't quite made a decision yet over what happens in a year's time if someone needs their bin replaced. At the moment, everyone is being given their bin for free, and it's our bin rather than their bin at the moment. So, but we need some decisions to be made, which we'll get done, and we'll have some discussions with Councillor Grymoisen when we find out how much money we're getting from the government.
Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Campbell. That was very clear and a good refresher from the other night. Could you just get into a bit more detail on the business side? Obviously, there's a lot more food waste being produced by restaurants, retail, and so on. How does that work? I think it's in place at the moment, is it? Or I'm not sure. I'm not very clear. So if you could help me on that, thank you.
Yeah. So under simpler recycling, all businesses which are over 10 FTE, full-time employees, need to have a recycling and food waste collection from the 1st of April this year. So if you are in Winchester, there are a number of businesses which are of that size, and that's a commercial waste collection service. So if you walk around Winchester now, you will see there are, for example, red BIFA food waste bins around. There are some from Serco. There are some from other organisations as well. So, and that's because if you're a McDonald's or Costa Coffee or something like that, you'll have a national contract with someone to collect your waste. They'll have been provided with a food waste bin, and the food waste will be going in there. So it's not something for us, but that's something which, and again, it's a really sensible thing. And their food waste is being treated in a similar way that we are. Ours is. So when we went to the plant just outside Basingstoke, there was some local authority waste going in there. There was also commercial food waste going in there. So you've got to do that. If you are less than 10 full-time employees, you don't have to do that until the 1st of April 2027. And there are, if you go into, say, some of our market towns, you go to Alresford or Bishop's Waltham or Wickham, there are lots of independent properties there where they don't have 10 full-time employees, so they've got a couple of years to start, and they've got a little bit of leeway. But that's happening across the country. Okay.
Quick supplementary, please, Chair. So can I have clarification on whether the carbon savings of that service are factored into our life cycle costings to our greenhouse gas targets? Thank you.
So if you look at the impact on Winchester as a whole, that would, we are producing as a whole across Winchester, we are producing less carbon as a result of businesses doing that. But the City Council, that's not something which is our responsibility. So the food waste which we collect from residential properties is something that we're really influencing and driving and being involved with. But the bit that commercial waste is doing, whilst it's having an impact overall, and our impact is coming from Winchester, it's less of something we can have an impact on, I think.
So it's two separate figures, one for the council, one for the district. Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Latham.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions, Campbell. Firstly, I just want to ask about take up, what we're anticipating, what do Rushmore, Eastleigh and Co sort of see at the moment. And then secondly, my ward is Bishop's Waltham. A lot of people have composters and gardens out there. What would you say to a resident who says, well, I already compost, raw food. I don't need to, or do I need to do this? What should I be telling them? Thank you.
Okay. So it's really difficult to come up with what the participation rate will be. So there are a lot of authorities nationally who've done this, and we think at the moment we're going to get about 1.8 kilograms of food waste per household per week across all our households. So we think we'll get between, based on other people, we'll get about 50 to 70% participation. Now that might go up and down seasonally. Our residual bins are about 95% participation because people go away on holiday and aren't there. But so we're looking at about 50 to 70%. Based upon what other people do. I mean, I think from our experience of recycling, people in Winchester are really keen on recycling. So we think it'll be quite high. One of the things that's going to be really interesting is after 2 or 3 weeks of you putting food waste in your food waste bin, you might go, that's a lot of money I'm throwing away. What can I do differently? So anecdotally, participation starts with lots of food waste going, and then it tails off to a new level once people have worked out that a lot of food waste is being wasted. So that's the participation one. In terms of, so I've got a compost heap. I'm anticipating that I'm still going to have a compost heap, but the things which I can't compost, bread, chicken legs, bits of fish, those sorts of things, can go in your food waste bin. And there's nothing to say you have to do this. But all the things you put on your compost heap, which are from the kitchen, could go in the food waste bin. If you have a compost heap, you can carry on using your compost heap, but there's a lot of food waste which might attract rats and other things, or which might cause a problem in your residual bin because it might be there for 2 weeks and you might be worried about smells. Now it's going to get collected every week. So yeah, that's what you can do.
If I can just add to that, yesterday I had I'm going to say the pleasure of going down to the new anaerobic digester just near Herne Airport. And actually, it was really interesting. It's like a process to replicate what happens in ruminant animals. And I'm just trying to figure out the right phrasing to use here. But basically, at the end of the process, gas appears, and what the anaerobic digester process does is it collects the gas. Now, as Campbell said, there's no obligations to participate. it's totally voluntary. We don't know what the government might do in terms of legislation in the future, but you know, we're giving everyone the opportunity to have their food waste collected. If there might be good reasons to keep going with your own compost heap or hot box or whatever, but you know, bear in mind that if you're dealing with food waste in your composter, the gas that is produced, which I believe is some form of methane, just gets released into the atmosphere. And my understanding is that methane is something like 20 times more damaging to the ozone layers than CO2. So, you know, I think there's, as Campbell said, there's all sorts of factors that are going to affect participation rate. We will have a program of communication going out. It's already going out in terms of social media, but once it's all rolled out, then there'll be a program of education, communication to try and encourage more people to participate or to be a bit more, select, perhaps bring more things into it, and hopefully we can capture the gas, save it going up into the atmosphere, and make carbon savings that way as well.
Councillor Miller.
Thank you. Are there any plans or anticipation of what will happen to people who don't join the scheme? Will we be monitoring their bins and trying to persuade them that they should, or even penalties for not using your food bin?
So we don't have any plans in place to impose penalties on people who don't use this at all. I don't know anyone who does. But we will be trying to encourage people to use this. So if you go forward a couple of years, there's an emissions trading scheme where if waste goes to incineration, it will cost the local authority in charge of disposal a significant amount of money. 25 to 30% of our residual waste is food waste. If the food waste is put into an anaerobic digester, it no longer attracts that penalty, which would go towards incineration. So we're not going to penalise anybody, but we really want to encourage people to do as much as they can to recycle as much as they can.
And dare I add to that, we're hoping that the carrot will be strong enough to get people to actually participate.
We'll overlook that one, yes. Councillor Lee.
In fact, you just made my point. I mean, obviously, getting the message out about the carrot, your council taxes will go up because, there's these add-on costs because of the new legislation that's coming down the line, I guess, is another way to say that. So your good behaviour gets rewards and, points mean prizes or whatever. But my other question was, you mentioned the amount of kilograms of waste per household. And you mentioned some targets and participation and so on. So presumably we're going to have some very tight taught KPIs to understand how well we're doing. But how are we going to measure that? I wonder if you could answer that, please.
So all the waste that will go to Otterbourne, it all goes over a weighbridge. So as it goes in, it's weighed. So we'll know how much weight of material from each round is going into the system or coming out of the system and going into the recycling system in the same way that we do at the moment. That's the intention, is to sort of monitor it and check participation with our teams. As I mentioned, we've got a couple of recycling officers to help do that and support that. Their initial focus is on communal properties, because they're traditionally harder to engage with because they don't own their bin, so they've got less responsibility with it. But we want to make sure everyone's involved. So I think, we will get lots of data, and we'll have lots of information, and we're working really closely with BIFA to check who is participating and if there are any issues which come up.
And a very quick supplementary. So presumably we will know which routes are doing better than other routes, and you'll be able to focus your recycling officers' efforts to get the message out to do better, sort of thing, without being big brother about it.
And I think to some degree we're starting to do that at the moment. So, and then as a simple example, we know where we're delivering bins to. So we are getting social media messages out to people in those areas that your bins are coming. So I haven't seen any yet because I don't live in an area where the bins are, but we're starting to get more and more targeted about how we communicate this to people to really focus this.
Councillor Eve.
Yes, thank you. So I wanted to say, first of all, just how impressed I've been by it all. I'm very excited to be getting my food one, but also the comms surrounding it. You mentioned you anticipate potentially in some areas people become more aware of how much food they are potentially needlessly wasting. I might cut back on that. Are there any resources either we on the council website have online, or we can point residents to? You know, I'm thinking things like you could use a bit more pepper. You don't need to chuck it all away, stuff like that. So are there resources we can signpost people to on that?
Yeah, so I think if my memory serves me right, there's some links on our website to that, and we've been working with the county council for a number of years on a Love Food Hate Waste campaign, which has got all sorts of things for recipes about things you can do with leftover food. So yes, I think that those are things which exist, and I think they're on our web pages and part of the frequently asked questions. But it's a really valid point. You know, when you see the food waste in your bin, all of a sudden it becomes a very visual problem.
And I think what will also happen, because this is being rolled out across the country, you know, in the past, food waste collections has not been across everywhere. Because it's being done right across the country, I think we're going to see it makes it easier for there to be national campaigns. It makes it easier for some of the campaigning groups to push out, you know, their literature and their communications more consistent. So it's not just down to individual councils to push this, but we do have a program in place.
I can have one first, then Councillor Brophy. You mentioned the sample bin liners you're going to put out with the bins, and you said that quite obviously we want people to put food waste in bin liners because you don't want loose food flying about. I'm just wondering, at the moment, obviously you don't use a bin liner in a recycling bin. Most people probably do in their grey bin, but they don't have to. We're inviting people in a cost of living crisis to go out and buy a pack of bin liners for 4 or 5 quid. What will happen if people don't use bin liners?
So I think, yes, you're absolutely right. We're encouraging people to do them, and I think if we get repeated instances where people aren't doing them, very similar to what we do at the moment, where people don't behave perhaps as they could do, we can do things like put bin hangers on and talk to them. And this is part of what our recycling team would be doing, to sort of talk to them about what they can do and how they can do things to support our bin crew who want to operate in a safe environment. And yeah, that, you know, as I said, we don't know how much money we're getting from this from the government. If we get a significant amount of money, we might decide to distribute bin liners out. We've got, I think we're distributing 26 to everybody, which is enough to get them into the habit, hopefully. And then they are really very cheap to buy online and last a long time. It's not a huge amount of money. Appreciate cost of living and all those sorts of things, but it's very similar to black bin liners. You know, we don't provide black bin liners. Everyone puts their rubbish in a black bin generally, and is used to doing that, and this is repeating that process.
I think I've seen, you know, in the samples I've seen, when you go and look at what you can buy, I think they're about 6 to 8 pence a bag, which is 6 to 8 pence, and you know, that could be quite significant. I think it's important to also realise that food waste accounts for an awful lot of what currently goes into the black bin. So the black bins should no longer have food waste in them, you know, dribbling down the bottom and creating a lot of weight. So one would hope that you'll need to replace your black bin bags less often. So hopefully there's swings and roundabouts there.
Great minds think alike. I was thinking about bin bags as well. I was also actually, just a quick note, I was also concerned about the cost of it and Googled and noticed how affordable they were. I mean, it may well be that a way of addressing that issue of the cost and cost of living would be basics bags. and donating selectively to basics banks to make sure we sort of address that concern if it does come up. But as I say, I think it is a marginal cost for most people if they're using them less. One question I had, and I think it came up on our councillor briefing, but it's just one I can't quite remember the answer, and I think it's worth airing in public as well, is why we should use a compostable bag if those bags are going to get taken out and then incinerated later at the anaerobic digester. And I think you also mentioned that you could use like a normal bin or a cereal bin, so it's obviously not essential for it to be compostable. Is it correct to assume that any residual kind of bits of microplastics could go into fields and spoil that fertilizer end product, or did I dream that bit?
No, you didn't dream that bit, and I think that's one of the things we're suggesting, is that if you use a compostable bin liner, whilst any bag could contain food waste and it would get taken out and then go for incineration, because of the way the bags are split, it's quite possible bits of plastic could end up in the anaerobic digester, at which point, because it's not gas, it would end up getting spread on the farmer's field soon after that. So we can't force this, but if we use compostable bags, once they're going through the anaerobic digester, and if they survive that, they then go on a farmer's feed and would biodegrade in the open air. So that's one of the main reasons we're suggesting that, because we want to have less microplastics around the environment.
It's a bit of a sophisticated message to put on the back of a leaflet, but ultimately is that going to go into some of the comms that goes out to people, like why compost is best, that kind of message, rather than you must use compostable bags?
Yes.
Final call for questions on this part before we move on. Okay, Campbell, please.
Okay, thank you. So I was going to talk now about extended producer responsibility, in the jargon EPR. So what this is about is the government has made producers financially responsible for the full net cost of managing the packaging material they place on the market. So that's collection, sorting, recycling, disposal. And so the reason for that is that it is then going to make producers and incentivize producers to design packaging that's easy to recycle and to reduce overall waste. It's really interesting. If you look at, for example, go back 10 years and you had an Easter egg, loads of packaging. Now a lot less packaging on an Easter egg. Simple thing you can all remember. And what's actually happening, and this started from the 1st of April 2025, is that producers, Tesco, Amazon, Marks and Spencer's, WH Smith's, not called anymore, are identifying how much packaging they produce. They're passing that to the central body, which is organising this, and are then going to be passing money to compensate for that to a body, which is going to come to us. So there's an organisation called PAC UK, which has very recently had the chief executive and other chief officers appointed, and their job is to be the sort of body that sits in between packaging producers and local authorities. And very recently they've started producing some of the base fees and how those fees will change and how those fees will be managed over the coming years. So I'll talk you through some of the figures, but essentially they set the fees and said, for example, if it's cardboard and you produce a ton of cardboard, you need to pay £200 to us for the cost of that packaging, which will then go to a local authority who is disposing of that. And they will then identify what sort of packaging that is. If it's quite easy to recycle, it'll be green. If it's not that easy to recycle, it'll be amber. And if it's more difficult to recycle or you can't recycle it, it'll be red. And that'll have an impact on what fees you pay and how fast those fees go up. Because the intention that PAC UK have is that the fees will multiply, so that if you pay £400 for per tonne for plastic packaging, for example, that would double in the next 3 years. So if you're a producer of plastic packaging, you've got to start thinking ahead and go, how do I stop producing packaging of this type, which is difficult to recycle? Because I know that all local authorities are now recycling plastic pots, tubs, trays and cartons. So I'll start producing them in that format. So in terms of packaging fees at the moment, This is how much the rate is for 25-26. So if you're Amazon, or if you're Marks and Spencer's, or if you're Tesco, and you produce packaging, this is how much you're paying. And overall, it's expected to be about £1 billion coming from packaging to local authorities to deal with waste and recycling. So you can see some quite big sums on there, and things which are more difficult to recycle, plastic, fibre-based composites, are more expensive for the producers than things which are easy to recycle and are commonly recycled, like glass or paper and card. And I mentioned it falls into one of three categories. I'll give you an example of this in a moment. But the point of this is that things which are difficult to recycle at scale because the specifications make it so, and that might be where if you've got a crisp tube and you've got an aluminium foil inside, you've got paper and you've got plastic on it, that makes it very difficult to recycle. So the cost of that originally is quite high, and it's going to double. Whereas if it's green, because it's recycled everywhere and it's simple to manage, the cost is low, and that's not going to rise as quickly. And there is pages and pages and pages of this on the internet if you want to look at it. Here's an example of some of the stuff about flexible plastics, what's included, what the classifications are, and you can read this at your leisure at a later point. But there's a lot of information on here if you're sad enough to read it, and I have read it, and I find it really interesting. Very sorry. So what that means is we've had a anticipated payment come to us from the government for Winchester for 25-26, which is £1.7 million, which is a significant amount of money. We're guaranteed just over £800,000 of that, but that's a payment which is due to support the rollout of improved recycling across Winchester. So I mentioned, for example, that the County Council is building a new material recycling facility. If we need to invest in new vehicles to take material to there, if we need to invest in new bins to make sure that pots, tubs, trays and cartons can be recycled, this is potentially where some of that money can come from. So we've got some work to do to think about how we fit in with the County Council's new MRF and how we spend some of this money. But that's a significant amount of money. That's not been confirmed yet. We're due to get that confirmed later on in the year, and the payments are due to start landing in November for quarters 1 and 2, and in January, and then in March for quarters 3 and 4. There's a whole load of caveats to that funding. We don't really know how much money is coming in from Amazon and Tesco and those sorts of things, and we have to spend it on things which cover our chargeable disposal costs, and there'll be some calculations in amongst that which take off the cost of any income we might get from this, and it's all modelled data, so it might change. But I think the main thing from this is funding we've never had to improve our recycling. Winchester is really keen on improving our recycling rate. I think members around this table are really keen on doing that, introducing pots, tubs, trays and cartons. There is some money becoming available to do that. The County Council is looking at investing in facilities to enable us to increase our range of materials, and these things are all coming together. And what you're
sorry, Campbell, if I may, on that point, I think the pertinent point on that slide is that whilst PAC UK is still relatively infant in its journey, it's the 4 years. So whilst, for example, this year we could receive the £1.6 million, the way in which policies wrote at the moment, they have 4 years to say maybe if there was a miscalculation on that payment. So we need to be quite prudent with that income, with the way in which things are at the moment, because we got very excited and then noticed the 4-year reclaim window. So I think that's a real pertinent point on that slide for funding.
So what you will see, I think, if you look closely enough, is stuff starting to change as a result of this. So I've got a couple of slides about what Marks and Spencer's have done. I've got a slide about Sainsbury's switching to their own brand cardboard packaging for fish and chicken. And if you read in there and you think they have 694 tonnes of plastic annually, and they're switching from plastic to cardboard. And you go back to look at what my rates were, and it's £200 versus 400 tonnes. So £200 versus £400. So if you move from one to the other and you've got 700 tonnes of it and it saves you £200 a tonne, that's £150,000 you've saved. So this is why they're doing this. So you will see this happening. And I was very excited very recently. I was at a meeting and someone handed around some biscuits. And it was quite a nice pack of Marks and Spencer's biscuits. And when it got opened, I got excited by this. Inside, instead of plastic, it's a cardboard tray. And if you look closely at your bin, you'll see a whole range of stuff which you might be used to being plastic is now actually able to go in the recycling bin for cardboard, because organisations are starting to change, and you'll see more of that happening. I got quite excited by that. No one else did, but I got quite excited. But you will see more of that happening. And I think this is the challenge for us, because we've got a plan as an organisation for how we manage this waste in the future, how we deal with an increased amount of cardboard, how do we deal with changes in the deposit return scheme, which might see all these plastic bottles here not go in the bin because you can get 20p back on them. So we've got to manage that and think about that. And part of the engagement with HEP, the Health and Environment Policy Committee, is really to start the thinking on that over the next couple of years.
Can I just ask you a quick question on that last slide you had up there with Sainsbury's? Just looking at the bottom line there, their sugarcane pulp trays are lined with polyethylene film. So how does that work? How does one get split from the other?
So I think it's quite similar to that. It's a very small bit, I think. So I think that, and this is what we've got to work through, and that's why they might start off doing that. But as you go through time, if you read through all the stuff on the website about what counts as what level, you'll find that might be at this level, and they'll be working to get it down to that level in time, I would think. So it's going to be really interesting to look at how Sainsbury's and Marks and Spencer's and Tesco change their approach to this, to move to packaging which costs them less money and is better for the environment. And yeah, if you start looking out for it, you'll see it. So, any questions?
This is one of those tricky questions because I don't know if you have an answer for it, but it's more a sense of if you're picking up on any pushback from business against this legislation. I think it was M&S's annual results, reflected as the impact of NI changes and legislation. And so obviously a lot of businesses are pushing back on government legislation. Could some of this, is there a risk that the packaging industry is actually going to push back on some of this? And some of these assumptions might be out by several years if it gets delayed, or is this looking like it's getting buy-in as per your M&S example there? That suggests it is getting buy-in, but are we considering this a done deal, or is it a kind of a still risky prospect?
So it's a really good question, and because this has been part of the Environment Act, this has been signposted for a number of years, and I showed you the sort of people who are behind Pack UK at the top. But there's a board in there which is made up of major business leaders from business, and I think this has got as a set of principles, and similar to simpler recycling and the deposit return scheme, this has got buy-in from all of the political parties and all of the business groups at the moment, because they can recognise the benefits this is going to bring to the whole value chain in terms of waste management. So I think it's something which the government is really aware of, that they've got to be doing this in unison with business, and making sure business supports this. But at the moment, businesses are starting to pay for this, and there's about 10,000 businesses of a scale that need to produce the data for this packaging across the country, and they're starting to do that. And we are starting to see things like this, which are changing in the packaging chain, which has a distinct benefit for us in terms of what we can recycle.
Councillor Miller, then Councillor Lee.
Which means one of our problems is that the more successful they are with getting their low rates, the less money you're going to get in to help deal with it. So it's almost like a vicious circle, that if they're successful, our financial pressure probably increases because we'll have more cardboard, etc.
I do hope they are successful. So I think, but what I'm thinking is in a couple of years' time, because of local government reorganisation, we'll move to become the waste disposal authority as well, and have a responsibility for that. And part of the cost, or a large part of the cost of waste management, is the disposal cost. So if the more you can shift from the residual stream to the recycling stream, which generates an income, which doesn't encourage an incineration fee, the better we'll be off. So if all the packaging companies do change their behaviour, and we're able to manage that, put systems in place to encourage that, that should significantly drive down the overall cost of waste and recycling in Winchester, or whatever we end up with, which will be to the benefit of us when we'll become a waste disposal authority as well.
Absolutely.
I'm not sure there's a particularly valid question, but I'll ask it anyway. Is there going to be an alignment issue with Hampshire Waste Recycling Centres? Do we need to get our messaging aligned? And presumably we're thinking about it. Has that happened? Does it, or is there more to do? Thank you.
Yeah, so at the moment, Hampshire has a site to build a single material recycling facility in Chickenhall Lane in Eastleigh, which they're starting the work on. It's probably about 2 years to build it. It's got some of the planning permissions already, because it's a site identified in the Minerals and Waste Plan. So we've been working with them for a number of years to make sure that what they build is in line with what we're thinking. So what they're going to do, and this is happening up and down the country, is they're going to be building the disposal facilities to take care of the things which are in the government's simpler recycling. So what we don't do at the moment is pots, tabs, trays, cartons, and plastic film, so crisp packets, for example. So they should be included in that. And if you look at what's in your bin and you take out the food waste and you take out those items, there's very little residual waste left. So we are absolutely going to be working with them to make sure that we align our communications across authorities. So if you are in one of the southern parishes of Winchester and Portsmouth is your neighbour, all of a sudden we'll be at the same time doing the same types of materials. So if you get communications from the Portsmouth News, for example, it'll be a similar type of communication. So we're absolutely looking to align that.
And just to say, obviously, the end of the postcode lottery is very welcome. You know, people move from Cheshire and then ask me as a councillor, why the hell are we not doing this A, B, and C? And here we, at long last, we've arrived, which is fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Bennett.
It's a question, going back to that slide on Sainsbury's, where they've, packaging's changing and maybe becoming more innovative. What are the risks and opportunities have we identified in that? And like that Sainsbury's example, where it's effectively what would appear to be a cardboard tray, but it does contain plastic. I think a lot of people would just put that in their recycling. What are the risks and opportunities that we identified with as packaging changes?
Yeah, so as an example, if you have a pet and you used to get canned pet food, a lot of pet food now comes in a pouch, for example. So as a local authority, where local authorities used to get an income from the metal in the tin can, now they don't get an income and potentially can't recycle the pouch. So you're absolutely right. There are things that as a set of local authorities we need to look at to respond to this. But what I think gives me a bit of hope is that this is happening across the country. So previously, Hampshire has developed a system which suits Hampshire. And when the Hampshire system was developed in the mid-90s, early 90s, it recycled the things that it thought it had a market for. So we don't do pots, tubs, trays and cartons at the moment because they didn't exist in the early 90s as a market. So nationally, everything is going to change at the same time. So April 2026, all local authorities are supposed to start collecting pots, tubs, trays and cartons and food waste. And so you're absolutely right, Councillor Lee, when you go to Stockport or Middlesbrough or wherever, you should be able to recycle the same stuff. And at the same time as that, the packaging labels should tell you this is something to be able to be recycled. So the whole system is being changed from the packaging in the first place to how it's produced to how it's recycled across the country at the same time. And it's a change that hasn't happened ever before, and it's going to be very exciting to see how it happens.
Councillor Latham.
Thank you, Chair. Just thinking a little bit ahead, Campbell, to some of the changes that are coming on further down the line. So when the MRF is built, unfortunately that sort of coincides rather with local government reorganisation. What sort of steps? What steps can you take over the next couple of years to prepare for something when the organisation, will be different? That the organisation implementing it will be different, and is there an element of coordination between likely sort of partners that means we're all getting to the same number of bins or whatever when the MRF is up and running? Is there anything you can say on that?
Yeah, so as part of Project Integra, which is the partnership that's been working on waste in Hampshire, Southampton and Portsmouth for a number of years, all the authorities are working together to work out and influence what the county councils and the other disposal authorities' infrastructure looks like. So we're all aware of what we'll need to collect. How that is collected is something that each local authority will need to think about, because residents in Rushmore, for example, might need a different collection system to residents in Winchester or the New Forest. But actually how local members choose to do that is up to local members, but actually the infrastructure which we're feeding into is the same, and we are working with other partners to make sure that we're all working jointly, so that when local government reorganisation happens, we are all working to the same set of objectives.
One more, Councillor Lee.
Thank you. I wanted to go back to the vehicles, and I wondered if you could just recap for me. We were doing an electric vehicle pilot trial, if I remember correctly, as part of the changes last time round. We've got the HVO 9 vehicles for waste and so on. How quickly will we be electrifying? Is there still a intent to do that? Because clearly that if we can do that, there's a better place to be than HVO, and certainly obviously better than diesel.
Yeah, so you're right. All our waste vehicles and the food waste vehicles, including the recycling vehicles, are running on hydrotreated vegetable oil, with the exception of one which is fully electric. So it's not a trial vehicle. It is a vehicle which is operating as part of the fleet, and is very much operating and has been out and about, and you can see it operating. It tends not to come in Winchester because it's slightly longer than your average vehicle, so it doesn't quite get around all our corners. But it does go across the rest of Winchester on sort of collections, and that's really good. From a sort of carbon point of view, using properly accredited hydrotreated vegetable oil means there's a significant reduction in carbon emissions. But you're absolutely right. What we're doing with the electric vehicle is learning from that, its operation, and potentially when we refleet the vehicles and look forward to local government reorganisation, we might have enough experience to know what works and what doesn't work. So our contract with BIFA runs out in February 2029. We're starting to think about what we do. We're starting to think about how that might work with potential partners who might, for whatever reason, we might need to have depots in different places. And one of the issues we have at the moment is the amount of electricity which is available in our current depot, which limits what we can do at the moment. But looking forward, 3.5 years, 4 years is the time scale to start thinking about what we go on a strategic basis.
Okay, I think we're about done on questions. Campbell, thank you very, very much indeed for your presentations. They're really, really useful. And thank you for your time this evening. And now we will move on. So next is the air quality strategy. Mr. Tate.
Chair,
Yeah.
is there any chance for a quick comfort break?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, let's reconvene at 5:02.
Yes.
I'm in.
Yeah.
I had a question. I want to raise.
Yes, the bill cost. Are the, yes. Especially, you know, so. That's close. Resigning, blocking the roads.
Good point. Yeah, not going on after that.
I don't have nobody's asked that. Well, I just did.
Perhaps those of you liaise with Rob Ennis, but you might have seen that your mic's not on.
Oh, I did.
Should we move on to the air quality strategy presentation? Mr. Tate, do you want to take your seat again up here?
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to speak again. And my comments are just going to relate to the transportation elements of the strategy. As someone who tries to walk everywhere in Winchester, air quality is very important to me. So I've read through the presentation with great interest. I note that under transportation, it comments lobby and identify capabilities to deliver the local cycling and walking infrastructure plan. Bugbear of mine, I have repeatedly argued for improvements to the city bridge for pedestrians. It's a key route into Winchester, identified in the plans. And yet, when I had a meeting on the bridge with Historic England and someone from the county, Historic England, English Heritage made it very clear it was not within their remit, and they would not condone anything happening to the bridge. It would be possible to create a pedestrian bridge alongside the existing structure. I recently attended the town forum when James O'Neill from Stagecoach, I thought he made an excellent presentation. The chair of the town forum asked him, what could the council do to help? My answer was straightforward. Make it really difficult for drivers to get into Winchester. Give that political leadership. Start closing city centre car parks. Make it expensive and difficult for the drivers to get into Winchester. It's a virtuous circle. By driving the private motorist out of the centre of Winchester, you free up the roads for buses. Mr. Ungham's thought, oh, yes, he is. My favourite bugbear again, taxis. We have 2 all-electric taxis. We've got to make life better for people who want to offer sustainable and environmentally appropriate solutions. Now, I say to some of the team in environmental health, because there's a monitoring station on the Romsey Road hill, and I say to them, look, if I get run over, just cut me open, because you'll see the pollution in my lungs. I'm up and down that road 2 or 3 times a day. So I think the points I'm trying to make, and it's not a big P political point, it is to show that political leadership and make life difficult, take people to where they should be going, which is an emphasis on walking, cycling and public transport. Wean people off of that addiction to the private motor car. I've done that over the last 7 or 8 years, and I hate it when I have no alternative but to use a car, which thankfully I don't own any longer. So political leadership, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tate. Councillor Cremoisen, do you want to address any of those points before we move to the presentation?
I will. I think there seem to be, I think it's 3 areas there. One relates to the city bridge, I think. One relates to the presentation by Stagecoach at the town forum, and one relates to taxis. Now, Mr. Ingram here is going to take us through a presentation about our air quality. It's an air quality update which covers the strategy and the the former air quality management area. So you know, it's quite precise in its scope, and that in itself does not necessarily mean that those items that Mr. Tate has raised are sort of within, if you like, the sights of what we will do. It's possible. The key emphasis there is on about monitoring and having and getting the information and the evidence to back up that gut feeling that people might have about air quality in particular areas, and that might lead, by having the evidence, to be able to do things, to recommend doing things that might address some of these points. But at the moment, we do not know for sure that there is a a hotspot, for want of a better word, in terms of poor air quality on the city bridge. Intuitively, there might be. I certainly am with Mr. Tate on it would be good to see more provision in terms of infrastructure for walking and cycling. We are lobbying for various things, and we've actually achieved various things. And if in I think the town forum, no, in a cabinet meeting, we recently signed off on some SIL money, which is in a small way going to help with a little part of that cycling infrastructure and walking infrastructure as well. So there are things going on, but not necessarily in this forum. With respect to the buses, buses, as everyone in this room knows, were privatised many years ago. It's a private company. We have limited direct leverage over the bus companies. The county has a little bit more, but not a huge amount. But I think, it would be good to see more people using the buses more often. But unfortunately, we do not act in an environment where we have, if you like, a king operating at the council who has unlimited resources and unlimited power to be able to decree that buses shall run and people will use them. We do not have that power to decree that there should be no vehicles coming into the city. And if we even remotely attempted to try and do that, I think there would be complete uproar. But that's not to say we shouldn't try and encourage changes that are trying to reduce the amount of traffic. Now, I want to talk about the taxi thing because Mr. Tate, you care passionately about this subject. You've raised it. So I hate having my back to you, but you've talked about this before very passionately. In fact, I think I was in the chair seat 2 years ago when you raised this, and my colleague, Councillor Porter, gave a response with Mr. Ingram here and offered to meet up with the specific driver that was behind the concerns and your wish to have electric charging points on the taxi ranks, and that offer was not taken up. So, okay, well, my understand, I'm only relaying my understanding of this. So let's talk about some facts here. So if you look at the government's official figures on the availability of electric vehicle chargers, you will find that Winchester District as a whole is in the top 3% of councils across the UK in terms of rapid and ultra rapid charging. We are not short of places to charge up. Now, as there are more electric vehicles out there, and as that grows, we would expect that number will increase. And I expect the private sector will look at the opportunity because it's a revenue earner, and that number of chargers will expand. Now, it's important to recognise the role of this city council in seeding the market a good number of years ago when the Lib Dems came into power and implemented a policy of putting in fast chargers and some of which have been upgraded to rapid chargers into many of our car parks. So we have a lot of availability of charging. Now, let's move on to the nature of taxi drivers. Now, taxi drivers in general are not what I would describe as wealthy, and many tend to buy cars at around about 5 years old. If you look at the population of our fleet, you will find that 90% of them are over 4 years old. Taxi drivers do not have the benefit of salary sacrifice schemes, which are behind a lot of the actual adoption of electric cars. That's not to say that all electric cars are bought through salary sacrifice schemes, but a lot of them are, and that is a government incentive. Taxi drivers do not have that benefit. So when we start thinking about, you know, the sorts of vehicles that taxi drivers might be encouraged to switch to, we need to understand their needs. We need to understand that the chances are they're going to be looking at electric vehicles that are not brand new straight out of the showroom. They're not 1 year old and still at a very significant value, because as we all know, there's a significant premium for a electric vehicle compared with its equivalent petrol or diesel. Now that premium is starting to fall, and we're starting to see electric vehicles that are much closer to their traditional petrol and electric and diesel equivalent. So the market is actually developing. If you look at what's out there brand new, you could see plenty of vehicles that functionally actually would meet the needs of taxi drivers. If you go back to vehicles, electric cars, which are in that range of 5 to 6 years old, and in a sort of 10,000 to 15,000 price bracket, which is where I suspect that many taxi drivers operate, you will find that there are far fewer in terms of the types of vehicles and the variety of vehicles. That's not to say there aren't any. There are some out there that actually I think would meet the needs and would have the kind of range that would be very suitable for a taxi driver. Now, it's important also to, in terms of who the taxi drivers are, it's important to understand that the transition from traditional vehicles to electric vehicles is a classic technology adoption thing. And what happens when you have a new technology is you have some early versions of the technology. I'd call them generation 1. And then what happens is, you know, the people who adopt that generation 1 things tend to be what we call early adopters. And perhaps I should just segue and say, for 20 years of my career, I was a market analyst for a company called Gartner. And my job was about the adoption of new technology and advising buyers and sellers about how that should happen. So you start with having early adopters, well, actually pioneers. They're your first people. Pioneers and early adopters will just buy new technology just for the hell of it. They have enough money, they will do it. And then you move through to the the early majority and the late majority, and then the laggards. And those phrases are not meant to be pejorative. It's just recognizing that some people will buy early and some people will buy late. Now, if you're a taxi driver, among your needs are, it's got to be dead reliable. I've got to be able to trust it because it's my business, it's my livelihood. I have a vehicle and I need to know it will work. I need to know it will get me everywhere. And as I'm sure many of us know, there's a lot of publicity about there, you know, about range anxiety, will it get me there, and all that sort of thing. So there's a lot of news flow, and there's also concerns about, will a 5 or 6 year old electric car actually still do the mileage, the distance that it claimed to when it was brand new? And these are all new things for people as a whole to get through. So now my understanding is all that stuff looks good, but there's a press out there that is working against that adoption, and you know, people who are taxi drivers are hearing that, and it's raising concerns, and they'd much rather at this point decide to work with what they know and love. They know they need something that's reliable. They need something that's got a decent range. It's got it can be serviced. They know how it's going to be serviced, and so on. And what you find is they choose vehicles that fit that category. And one of the most popular vehicles out there, or platform that's out there, is the Toyota Corolla, Toyota Auris, Sportswagen, and it fits that bill. That's what taxi drivers want. And at the moment, they haven't seen, what they need to see is other people with, you know, taxis that, you know, that work, and they'll hear positive messages. Now, Mr. Tate, if I remember correctly, you have, I'm going to call him a friend. He may not be a friend, he may be just an acquaintance, but you have a friend who is a taxi driver. And that particular taxi that he drives is a Nissan NE200, I think it is. And it's based on the first generation Nissan Leaf. And the Nissan Leaf had a range of 126 when it was first out, I believe. And the van vehicle, which is based on it, I say van, it's an MPV, has a range of 106 miles, and that is quite limiting as a vehicle, as a taxi driver, and particularly in cold weather or hot weather where the range tends to change. So, and I commend this friend of yours, Mr. Tate. He is a pioneer among his category of market adopters. He's bought into the message, and he should be congratulated in that sense for taking that plunge. But unfortunately, what he's discovered is that the range is very limiting. And it's difficult, you need to charge up during the day, and of course timeout means timeout from earning money. So what we most need to see to get the taxi fleet to be switching over is taxi drivers need to become confident that the vehicle is suitable as their business tool. It's their primary income owner. They need to know that it will be cheap to run. They need to know it will be reliable, and they need to be able to afford it. They don't have the luxury of being able to spend 40, 50K on a brand new Audi e-tron. And frankly, in most of the taxi market, they're not going to spend that and then go on the taxi ranks. The ones who will do that, and there is a taxi on our books, which is a Tesla Y, has a range of 374 miles. And I suspect that driver mostly does the airport taxi rides and the business executive rides. So that's the sort of thing we're dealing with. We will see adoption happen when the market, the buyers, start to see that the vehicles are in their price range and they overcome their anxiety about range and about reliability and about fixability and so on. And also when hopefully the press out there and any other people out there reduce the amount of negative message about it. That's what will bring it forward. Now, I also want to talk about the implications of installing chargers in the ranks. The first thing to recognise is the ranks are only accessible to Hackney carriage cars, not to private hire. Now, if we look at our fleet, I think it's 86 of them are Hackney carriages, and the other nearly 200 are private hire. So if we were to do anything, investing in charging points on the taxi ranks, it would only be a benefit to 86 out of nearly 300 vehicles. I should also point out that in the Winchester district, there are roughly 75,000 registered vehicles. Now, I haven't passed that out into private cars or vans or anything, but there's roughly 75,000 registered vehicles, of which there are less than 300 registered as taxis. So that's about 0.4%. What this council has chosen to do several years ago, and Mr. Ingram here was at the centre of the work done to implement those charges, is we've decided to focus on the 99.6% of vehicles by making sure that we have sufficient charging capability in our district to support those vehicles, or at least seed the market, and then private sector has moved in on the back of that ultimately, and we're now in the top 3%. It seems much better idea to me to focus on the 99.6% than on the 0.4%. We're having something like 250 times the impact. In terms of policy incentive, within our taxi licensing policy, we have conditions that set the maximum age at which a car can first be registered as a taxi, and also a maximum age at which the car can first be re-registered as a taxi. Now, for electric vehicles and hybrids, the ages of which each of those points are 3 years older. So basic older than if it was a petrol or diesel. What that means is a taxi driver can buy a full EV or a hybrid 3 years later in its depreciation cycle, and that helps to overcome some of the reality of the fact that EVs and hybrids have been significantly more expensive, and they can run it 3 years older. So they get the same amount of time when they can register their taxi in the Winchester district. So really, just finally, in terms of the taxi question, which has come up several times before, I just wanted to set the record straight on that and say, let's recognise that Winchester District is in that top 3%. We are very EV enabled in terms of infrastructure compared with other places in the UK. That's not to say there aren't places where they would benefit from EV charging in a very local place. And what I will say is, if there are any taxi drivers out there who are hearing this through members or through Mr. Tate or through, I doubt this is happening, listening to this broadcast live, I would welcome the opportunity for them to come and talk to us, David and myself, and we will listen to their challenges and their concerns. At the end of the day, they will have to decide what their decision is, and we'll see to what extent we can help them. And if members would like to pick up any other points that Mr. Tate raised that I've just not covered, would welcome you doing so. Thank you very much, Chair, for indulging me there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cremoyson. That was a pretty comprehensive response to those points.
So
do you want to go straight into the?
But I'll try and shorten my introduction. So really just to say, City Council recently successfully submitted an application to DEFRA to revoke the air quality management area in the city, as we are now well within the standards required and actually have been the last 2 or 3 years. The purpose of this session here today is to engage with members on the new air quality strategy, which legislation requires that we develop and implement across the whole district. And there are several components in this strategy which members may well have ideas on organisations that we should engage with and or places which local people might regard as potential areas of air quality concern. And with that, I'll hand over to David. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cremoyson. For those of you that don't know me, my name is David Ingram. I'm the service lead for public protection, which in old money is environmental health, licensing, and health and safety. So as previously mentioned, my presentation is about the air quality strategy primarily, which we have already adopted. I mean, I was at previous HEP meeting going through the draft air quality strategy. So some of you may have already learnt about that through that process. But the current strategy was in fact adopted back in March of this year. And that is available for public viewing on our website. And it's, as Councillor Cremoyson just mentioned, it is a response to the same piece of legislation, in fact, that Campbell was talking about earlier, the Environment Act 2021. And that piece of legislation sets out a requirement on central government to meet certain air quality objectives going forward. And those have been set by regulation to be achieved by 2040. In support of the actual legislation, there is the National Air Quality Strategy for England as well, and that places an ask on all local authorities up and down the line to look at their air quality within their districts, regardless as to whether or not they have an existing air quality management area in their district and an associated plan. And it requires that they set out in a strategy how they expect to deliver air quality improvements within their jurisdictions in support of the overall national objectives. So, as I mentioned, our strategy was adopted back in March, and it is a 5-year plan with the aim of achieving 2 primary parameters. One to do with nitrogen dioxide, as you can see on your screen, and that the strategy is seeking to achieve an annual mean standard of 30 micrograms per metre cubed by 2030. And for particulates, PM stands for particulate matter, and the little number next to it, 2.5, stands for fine particulates, which is essentially particulates that are finer than the human hair that remain in suspension for long periods of time. Our strategy seeks to achieve an annual mean standard of 10 micrograms by the same year, 2030. And it's notable to point out that this is 10 years in advance of the national standard of expectation. And these standards were arrived at through an air quality, a cross-party air quality steering group that was represented by the Liberal Democrats, the Conservatives, and the Green Party as well. So it was set out through due consultation. Winchester is in fact the first local authority in Hampshire to adopt its new air quality strategy. So we believe we are ahead of the curve. There are one or two that aren't too far behind us, New Forest being one of them. And I believe that they're going to be adopting their strategy in the next few months. So the outgoing position, as just briefly mentioned, was the air quality management plan. We had an air quality management plan that we had in place since 2003 and specifically covered the city centre and what we refer to as the 8 radials or main routes in and out. So we've been monitoring air quality actually since 1998, declared that we had an issue and declared that we had an air quality management area. And with that, we had to have an associated plan. Each year we have to submit what is called an annual status report to DEFRA in the spring. And this year was no different. We submitted our ASR, as we refer to it, in May. And as part of this year's assessment, we asked of DEFRA, who are effectively our sort of environmental bosses when it comes to air quality, permission to revoke our air quality management area. And we've managed to do that simply because we've achieved 3 consecutive years of compliance with those national air quality standards. And the current standards for nitrogen dioxide are 40 micrograms annual mean. And what was and remains the current standard prior to the PM2.5, the PM10 standard is also 40 micrograms per metre cubed annual mean standard. And we've achieved those now for 3 years or more. In fact, for PM10s, we've achieved that since 2015. So we've got more than enough data to demonstrate that we've been compliant in the coarse particulate standard. And in response to our ASR request to DEFRA, we received their permission, as it were, confirming their agreement for us to revoke our air QMA, and that we received that just last month. So our proposal is to revoke our current air quality management area. So that does mean that we can set aside one regime of air quality in legal terms, and we can transfer directly onto our air quality strategy, as I say, we adopted back in March. So moving on to the strategy itself, there are strategic themes within the strategy. I would encourage you all, if you have time, I know you're all very busy, but it is on our website and there was a link within the presentation directly to it. It is a document which is being developed with the assistance of a consultant, and the document is intended to be a standalone document that is geared towards the public. So it's not meant to be a highly technical document. It sets out the reasons why we're monitoring air quality. It sets out what the air quality impacts are in terms of public health. And it goes on to explain air quality levels within the Winchester district. And then it goes on to, as I say, these 13 thematic areas of delivery. And as you can see those in front of you, they are air quality and modelling. The reason we need to continue to do that is because without the data, we don't know if we're making any improvements. And it's a science-based approach, and science relies on data. We will be looking at how transport impacts air quality in further detail across the district. Not just transport, although transport is the main contributor to particulates and nitrogen dioxide in our ambient air quality, i.e. the air outside buildings that we all have to breathe. There are a number of static sources, clearly. The way we heat our homes, most of us have got gas central heating, and therefore we have boilers, they produce particulates. So we will be looking at that element as well in terms of how we can influence those emissions. All of us spent somewhere in the region of 80 to 85% of our lives inside buildings, indoors. So indoor air quality is the new area that we are being asked to look at from central government. And there are things like how we cook our food, how we heat our homes. Over the COVID period, there was something in the region of 40+% increase in the use of solid fuel burning stoves, wood burning stoves. That also affects how internal and external air quality. So we'll be looking at that piece in more detail. And in terms of how we construct our built environment. The way we build our buildings has an impact in terms of air quality, as you might imagine, the way we demolish structures, the way we construct them, the use of cement, etc., all contributes to air quality in the air that we breathe. And there's a nice schematic there that sort of demonstrates all those relationships. So moving on to those 13 strategic areas of actions, or sorry, from the 5 thematic areas, there are 13 actions that we will be looking at in some detail with the view of delivering over the 5 years of the plan. This can be found in the appendix. This is if you like, the nuts and bolts of the strategy itself. The first one that you can see in front of you is to conduct a detailed atmospheric source inventory for both nitrogen dioxide and PM2.5 particulates. So essentially that is a study to understand where are these pollutants coming from? Are they coming from outside of our district? So fine particulates can travel large distances. Are they coming from external sources to our district? So we're looking at the likes of our neighbours down the road in Southampton. There's large ports. Operations in that area. There's a thriving cruise liner industry. They are sources of particulates, but in addition to that, you've got the agricultural sector. So we've got sources that are generated some inside our district as well. We've got our own traffic source emissions. We've got external traffic source emissions. We've got the M3 running directly through our district. We've got the M27 just down south outside of our district. So there is quite a science about how we identify where PM2.5s and where nitrogen dioxide is coming from, both whether it be from vehicles, from static sources, from construction sources, and so on. So we need that piece of information. At the moment, we are working with Hampshire County Council. They are going to be and are in the process of commissioning a county-wide study to develop an atmospheric inventory. They have got to the point where they've gone through their procurement process, and they will just be going out to market literally imminently. I haven't been given an actual date, but it's literally in the next matter of 2 or 3 weeks to go to market, and they will be going through a procurement process where they will source at 3 or more quotes, and then there will be a commissioning process through them. We expect that study to commence in the 4th quarter, i.e. from January, and we hope to have the results of that study in the 2nd or 3rd quarter of next year. It has been a little bit delayed, I have to confess, because initially we were looking to commission the study ourselves. However, Hampshire County Council's Director of Public Health's office stepped in, said they wanted to do a county-wide study, so we stepped back, and it's taken us a little bit longer to get where we are today. We need to expand our air quality monitoring network. That is something that is within our control directly at the council. We have a small team of officers that are currently engaged in exploring low-cost monitoring solutions, and in some cases we've already deployed those low-cost monitoring solutions. We have 5 what we refer to as earth-sense FI monitors that monitor for both nitrogen dioxide and PM2.5, and these will be deployed across the district. All of those will be deployed by January. 2 of them, I apologise, are already being deployed. One in Bishop's Waltham at Jubilee Hall, and one co-located in Winchester on our larger air quality monitoring station. We'll be deploying another 3 in Whiteley and Denmead and also in South Wonston. And that's to get a broader understanding of air quality within the wider district. Up until now, we've been focusing very much on Winchester Town Centre. We are very much engaged in a regional air quality network. There is a new body called Clean Air South, of which I am a partner on, if you like. I'm part of the board for that, which is a body that comprises of local authorities, represented by myself at Winchester, directors of Public Health Office. We have Southampton University Civics Department that's involved with that, the Sustainability Research Institute from Southampton University, and the Wessex Health Partnership as well. So we're all working together to try and tackle air quality on a regional basis. And a part of that programme of work is engaging with businesses to understand how they are trying to reduce their air quality impacts and also carbon impacts. We've also been involved as active members of the Burn Better campaign, which has been delivered by the Environment Centre in Southampton. And we've engaged with our co-local authorities, Southampton City Council, Eastleigh Borough Council and New Forest District Council as well. So we are very much plugged into a regional approach. As you'll appreciate, there are no glass curtains that demarcate our districts. We all breathe the same air and it travels between us. So we need to tackle this together. We're engaging in a sensitive location study, which is to say we're identifying those locations within our district that are seems to be sensitive. These are schools on high traffic areas. We have a number of those that we've identified, and we are looking to engage with those schools. There's a little bit of work still to be done in terms of identifying who we want to engage with initially, but we are great advocates of adopting a citizen science approach, where we'll be engaging with those schools, involving the school children to better understand the impacts of air quality on health, and to make that a real live science experience by having low cost sensors that they can use and see where the air is good and see where the air is not so good. And that educational piece is really central to improving people's understanding of the impacts of air quality on public health. We'll be adopting an anti-idling campaign. This was scheduled to be, I think, in 2027, but as you'll appreciate with the timeline of this particular strategy, this started way before the government white paper came out at the end of last year. And we're now very aware that things could well change, as you pointed out earlier, Councillor. And so we're bringing some of our programme work forward a little bit. So we hope to start an anti-idling campaign. We'll explore what's involved with raising that as an awareness issue amongst our population. And there is actually an enforcement element to that as well, in terms of we can serve fixed penalty notices for individuals that allow their vehicles to idle after they've been asked to turn them off. But again, there's a resource implication to that as well in terms of how we're going to practically enforce that. So that's all part of that programme of work. Items 6, 7 and 8 I've batched together. These are to lobby and identify the capabilities of the LC Whip, which has already been mentioned by Mr. Tate. Support for Hampshire County Council in the investigations of transport reduction policies, and similarly support to Hampshire County Council on planned measures to increase the uptake of public transport. These are all primarily Hampshire County Council led projects. They are the Transport Authority. We are not. We are obviously a direct stakeholder of that work. So we are committing through our air quality strategy to continue to lobby them hard to deliver on some of the promises that have been previously made. And certainly one of the transport reduction policies that Hampshire County Council have set out is a 10% reduction of overall traffic within the county, which is quite an ask, but we will try and hold them to task on that. That piece of work is scheduled to start for 2027-28. Again, we will start opening comms on that as well with those guys to ensure that we can bring that forward. Just rattling through the last few, development of an education advisory policy on domestic combustion. That ties in with the internal air quality piece I mentioned earlier. We'll schedule that for the spring of 26 next year. that would also feed into the next item, which is to explore the feasibility of smoke control areas within our district. This is a tricky one. This is probably one of the most politically sensitive areas of our proposed delivery. We're not committing to deliver a smoke control area. The clues in the vernacular insofar as explore the feasibility, and that means that we will go through quite a detailed consultation with our residents. We will go through an educational piece with our residents to inform them on how the use of wood burning stoves can affect poor air quality or influence poor air quality, how that then translates to impacts on public health, and appeal to those people that who otherwise have central heating systems in their homes, to maybe burn more judiciously and less vociferously, if you like, to ensure that our air quality is improved. Number 11 is develop educational advisory policy for indoor air quality. As I mentioned earlier, we spend 85% of our time indoors. This is really about pulling together information from wider sources and making them really easily accessible on our own website, to inform our residents on how they can improve the air quality inside their own homes. As you'll appreciate, internal living space is a very personal matter. We have to be sensitive in terms of how we manage that information. So this is not this is more an educational health piece. So we'll obviously be engaging with our communications teams on how we can best get that messaging across. And then finally, we propose to strengthen our local plan. We've been doing a lot of work with our local strategic planning team to, as it were, firm up our current strategic plan to require developers to develop their developments in a manner that has reduced impact to air quality. And that piece of theme work will be following through to the next iteration of the plan, which we hope to, with their direction, we hope to get that passed before LGR commences in the new authority, if the timeline remains the same, in the spring of 2028. So there's a lot of work to be done on that as well. And as part of that, we will be developing planning guidance to developers on how to undertake air quality assessments and how to reduce their impacts accordingly. Clearly, that does not apply to South Downs National Park, who are their own planning authority. We can't apply that to them. And that is mainly the areas of work. I hope you managed to take all that in. Just in terms of delivery, we've set up an officer working group within my service. So there's 4 of us that will be taking most of this work forward. So the resourcing is already going to be delivered through existing in-house resources. Each action as set out will be considered as a mini project for delivery. So if there are any particular cost implications, those will be brought back through the due governance process. So we will do costings analysis, write papers, and obviously get that approved through cabinet. And I just wanted to set out a little piece about the future, because there is going to be quite a bit of change going forward. And one of the questions that we've been asking locally is, where do we think air quality might sit within the new combined authority structure or within the unitary authority structure? We don't know is the simple answer to that. That is yet to be determined. What we can say is that Winchester City Council, we believe, is leading the way on air quality across the region. And we believe that we can make a real difference for Winchester in the next 2 years going forward and maintain that position. So very, very quickly, we believe that these particular elements are deliverable by April 2028, which is the modelling, the expanded air quality monitoring network. We will continue to work and develop the regional network. There's branding and terms of reference that we're working on, and obviously marketing to make sure, communication strategies to raise the profile of that particular network. We've already commenced the sensitive location study, and that's going to be something we're going to be working on and developing on with local schools particularly. The anti-idling policy is local policy. We can deliver that through that particular officer working group. And again, similarly, the domestic policy advisory we can develop and deliver through our comms team and our websites. And the smoke control areas, again, that's Winchester City Council led. can be deliverable, but obviously that depends very much upon what the political appetite is subsequent to public consultation. We believe that we can firm up and develop the air quality for the strategic local plan and then the next iteration. Where we're not so certain on delivery is I hate to say it, further to what Mr. Tate said, delivery of LC WIP, the 10% traffic reduction and the enhanced sustainable travel aspirations, because these are Hampshire County Council, primarily Hampshire County Council led initiatives, and we can only act as a bit of a lobbying body in terms of those delivery of those. So we will just give a commitment that we'll do our best to make those happen. And that is me. Thank you.
Thank you, David. That was really, really useful. There's clearly an awful lot going on and not a few frustrations in all of that as well. Okay, over to members for Councillor Bennett.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This actually relates to your last comment, and I think much of my question is going to be rhetorical, but I'd like to hear what you believe Winchester could do to influence that. So I noted under the transport section that the plans there are not due to start till 2027, which is pretty much when Hampshire County Council will cease to exist. And wonder if the delay in that part of the policy is due to the financial issues that Hampshire County Council are currently facing. And following on from that, how the loss of, for example, the number 20 bus from Wickham and the potential threat to the D1 and D2 service from Denmead and Hambledon fit into an increase in the use of public transport and a 10% reduction in car journeys.
Help. If you want to have a go now.
Yes, thank you, David. Difficult to really speak on behalf of another authority. I mean, we all know the financial pressures that the county council have been under. The more I've thought about it, the more sympathy I have for them. But nevertheless, there have been promises of delivery of LC WIP, promises of traffic reduction, and there seems to be a bit of, let's just say, dates slipping out and lack of focus on some of those projects. Now, it's not something I've been directly involved in. It's one where the Councillor Lerney has the sort of within her portfolio the brief for transport and then the Councillor Todd, who is both our leader but also a county councillor, and Councillor Porter in our county council roles are doing what they can to lobby the county council to make more progress towards achieving the objectives and the aspirations of the Winchester Movement Strategy. But these are things where, as a city council, in our city council roles, that's sort of as much as we think we can do. So, and as for the buses, I'm not totally familiar with the buses in the I'm not at all familiar with the buses in the Denmead area. Very familiar with some of the things gone up in my area and in the city. And from my attendance, my listening into the briefing at the town forum, it's very much Stagecoach are the operator in this area, and they're a private sector company. They have been running routes which have been subsidised in the past through a subsidy delivered by the county council, and then as those subsidies get withdrawn, the route no longer becomes viable. It effectively becomes a loss maker for Stagecoach. And those of us who've operated in the private sector know that if you're losing money on something, you don't do it for very long, or you go out of business. So they're going to focus on the things that make them money. And that's the structure that we have in place for public transport, that we've had for decades now. We'll have to see whether with the new combined authority, whether that opens up opportunities for change, I suspect. I don't know if that answers, hopefully that answers your question. I'm sure you'll hit me with a supplementary if I've missed it.
Yeah, thanks. That does pretty much answer my question. Just on the number 20 bus from Wickham, and it's not my ward, so this is second-hand information and my figures might be wrong, but I believe the amount of money required to keep that service going was something relatively small, like in the region of £35,000 a year. Yeah, and I'm just wondering if that's something that the city council. I know transport is a county council matter, but where it affects particularly our rural communities, because now Wickham has no bus to Winchester, Denmead, it's hasn't for at least some time, if ever. If that's something that the city council could pick up and look at.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a very tactical thing in the context of air quality strategy. It's very operational, for want of a better word. There've been a number of bus services. I think it's the number 61, or maybe I think it's 61 has been canned. It goes to, I know it's very relevant to people in Colton Common and Twyford. That's had a fair amount of attention in the press. The number 4 through to Takedown, which is in the city, has been canned as well, and that's caused a lot of stress. Other services have had little tweaks where, in my area, for example, the number 6 has had little tweaks as a result of the overall changes in the network, which a few people have complained about, and I've had to say to them, look, let's keep this in context. We have a pretty good service. Now, as for Wickham, I'm not familiar enough about that, and it's not within my brief to go and lobby for that particular thing. I think big picture, it could be raised with Councillor Lerny outside of this forum. It could be raised through the county councillors, but as part of an overall picture. Our MP's been involved in raising the profile of the bus issue in general, of which he has focused in on the 61, I think. But it isn't just the 61, it's buses in general. They're all being, the support for some of these routes has been significantly reduced, and that makes other routes, various routes, vulnerable.
I think I can help a little on that. I think the problem is that Hampshire, as the Public Transport Authority, has done very little, if anything, to encourage any operator to serve latent or suppressed demand in particularly rural areas, where they would need to spend a minimal amount of money on publicity and information flow to encourage people to shift to those buses that are there. The 20 is the link between Wickham and Fareham, but it's through Knoll Village and Funtley. Those are 2 communities now left without any transport links, and therefore any prospect of modal shift from car to bus, well, it's all going to go the wrong way, isn't it? Similarly with the 61, which was the link between Winchester, Twyford, Colton Common and Eastleigh town centre, that is now lost for the first time, as our MP said, in 100 years, and again is unlikely to come back. Meanwhile, Public Transport Authority are spending the money they've got from central government for the bus service improvement plan to bolster the already frequent services that are making quite nice profits for Stagecoach and to be fair, other operators such as Blue Star as well. But anyway, Councillor Lee, you're next, then Councillor Brophy.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I've got a number of observations, comments and some questions, if I may. And thank you, David. Obviously a lot going on, a lot to do. And that was a lot to get across in a short period of time. My first question, I'm a little bit puzzled. Why would we revoke the air quality management area? And I can see why. You've got the old standard, you've met that, but we've set higher standards. So why wouldn't we keep that air quality management area going on for longer? And that would be my first question. My second question, or a comment first of all, is that air quality and climate change are two sides of the same coin. And I think I've said this before, and I understand how the air quality strategy has come about. It's as laid down, but there are PM1s, which, as you know, are short-lived climate particles as well. They have health implications. There's issues over bonfires with respect to that. So can I ask, is it possible, and is there a way to weave this in terms of improving actions and awareness? Because this is a joined up issue, which is far reaching. And then just moving on quickly on to the...
Can we stick with those two first?
Okay.
Otherwise we start to forget what's been asked.
Yeah, I'll take the first one, which is in simple terms, why are we revoking the air quality management area? Putting it bluntly, the government expects us to, because if we can demonstrate that we've got 3 or more years of complying with the national air quality standards of today, and we are. That's why we are required to submit an annual status report in which we set down all of those results. Then their expectation, the language is they expect us to revoke the AirQMA, and the reason for that being is, I mean, this is my take on it, is that the government wants to be able to demonstrate an improvement in air quality across the country. And if we don't need to retain them, why are we retaining them? But that's where the new Environment Act has come in, which has set the new standard, which is on PM 2.5, which, as you know, is the fine particulates standard. Their expectation is that we being the country, achieve certain standards by 2040. Our air quality strategy, as we've adopted and set out, seeks to achieve those standards 10 years earlier. So we believe that we can do that. But if you think about it in terms of it's a national standard, and there are other areas of the country that are in a much worse state than we are in terms of air quality, you know, your major urban conurbations, they have to be able to achieve that standard, but they get longer to do it. So we're saying we can achieve it earlier. Yeah.
David, if I can just add to that, and hopefully I'm not speaking out of turn, and David will probably slap my wrist if I've said something I shouldn't do. Rather than looking at that as a negative thing, the revocation of the air quality management area, it's actually a positive thing. It's actually an indication of progress and success. And if we go up a level, instead of thinking just about Winchester, DEFRA, who are the body that we have, to write to revoke this, are a national agency. They're looking across the whole country, and in effect, they've got councils across the country doing this work. And what they want to see is progress, and that being able to revoke the AQMA says we've made progress. Doesn't mean to say we're going to stop monitoring. It just means we've made progress. Air quality has improved here. We, as a result of revoking it, we now have an air quality strategy across the whole district. So that is broadening the strategies from what it was before. And if you then think about what DEFRA are seeing, is they're seeing the information from the district or Winchester City Council. They're seeing similar information from the New Forest. They'll be seeing similar information from East Hants, from Test Valley, and so on. And they'll be able to see from those those monitoring reports, are there places that are doing better than others, and why is that? You know, is it an indication that perhaps some best practice advice needs to go to areas that are not doing so well? So I see it as progress, and if you like, part of the bigger Team UK, or maybe, I'm not sure it's UK wide, but maybe Team England, activity, we're playing a role as part of a bigger team in looking after our back garden, so to speak.
I may just reply to that quickly. Then we need to get the messaging right, because you can read this both ways. And I think, you know, it's unfortunate. We want to lead. We're working towards the World Health Organization's targets, which is fantastic. It's a better standard. And yet here we are revoking something which is meeting a lower standard. You know, it just seems a bit strange, really, if you look at it that way.
Yeah, I totally get it. Yeah, it's I hear, you know, the fact that you've interpreted it that way says that there's probably other people interpreting it that way. So we'll think about it in terms of what we do next. We can't undo what is being communicated. And some of this is about, you know, you described what we have done, which is perfectly correct. Maybe there's a way to spin it, possibly get criticism for spinning it too much, into a more positive message. But I appreciate the comment, Councillor Lee.
Okay, the second point was, David, on bonfires and messaging on that.
Short-lived climate, the air quality and climate change are two sides of the same coin. And short-lived climate particles, PM1s, is not something that's embedded in our plan. So again, we want to lead, and we're doing a great job. So here's an opportunity to do that integrated thinking with CNAP and our other plans and so on.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I mean, we do have the capacity with some of the sensors that we currently operate to monitor PM1s, which is even finer than PM2.5s, even smaller. I mean, putting it bluntly, the standards as set out in law is PM2.5. So that's what we will be reporting on as part of our annual return, because we will continue to do an annual return to DEFRA. And we will report on those, but there is nothing that says so. One of the fundamental differences with the new regime of the air quality strategy, it doesn't prescribe how it needs to look. Whereas under I won't call it the old regime because it's still relevant to those local authorities that have an air quality management area. But under that regime, there is a very prescribed format in which you have to submit your annual status report. That isn't there anymore. So we could add additional information, but it's not required to be reported on because there's no statutory standard attached to it.
Okay, I'll come back to you in a sec. Let Councillor Brophy have a go.
Thank you. Actually, I was just on the AQMA and why the reasons for revoking. Just clarification: is this Councillor Crimoisen pointed out that we can look at this as a success story? How much of it is, given that we're still in the process of monitoring and trying to understand the causes and the causes of pollutants, and also the interventions that might work, how much can we actually claim credit for some of the improvements based on the interventions that have taken place? Or how much might be, for example, the introduction of Euro 6 engines in cars, or maybe better cruise ships turning up in Southampton? Actually, another question, just a very brief question I was going to ask, was on you mentioned HCC are doing a county-wide study. Is that also looking at, say, the impacts of the airport? I know, David, we've engaged in the past about Otterbourne residents' concerns about airports. I will be talking to you about that, Kane, over the next few weeks, I imagine. But that is part of the, I suppose, the concern around, you know, the airport in Southampton.
Well, if I may just take your second question first, whilst it's fresh in my mind. Yes, the study will look at outside point sources of air pollution. So yes, it will be looking at the docks, it will be looking at the airport, and how that impacts and influences air quality within the wider Hampshire region. And in terms of granularity, I will double check this, but I think it goes on 1 kilometre squares across the whole of the county. So it does go down to that level. I think it might even be more detailed than that. In terms of what I would broadly refer to as technological advancements and how that's impacted air quality, undoubtedly yes. You know, combustion air, internal combustion air engines are less polluting than they were 15, 20 years ago. That has massively improved air quality. So that's not a local intervention. What I would say is local intervention is things like our car parking pricing strategy. So we've got the tiers within the city, which has discouraged people from parking in the city centre location and encouraging them to park outside and use park and ride. So that's definitely had a positive impact on local air quality. But undoubtedly, technological improvements have had a benefit across the board. So there are a number of other local authorities similar to us that are actually revoking their air quality management areas.
Councillors, anybody else wanting to go? Councillor Lee.
Thank you. My other question related to smoke control areas, and it's a request, please, to ensure that we think about the rural exposure, the what I call the topographical temperature valley inversions, which we're very familiar with in the Central Meon Valley. Thankfully, solid fuel use, I think, is on the wane. But no doubt, when it gets very cold, people revert to the cheapest source of fuel, and that's wood burning. And we know what that does. And of course, that traffic emissions from the A routes around the valleys, and it does just sit there, and it's pretty horrible. So I appreciate the urban issue. Obviously, it has primacy sometimes, but let's not forget about the rural area. And just to pick up on the issues you've been talking about, the transboundary issues are really, really important. So it's great to hear that that's been thought of. So that really was my point of the rural areas. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that will all form part of the consultation piece in terms of whether or not we are looking to what the implications might be for a district-wide smoke control area, or we could centre smoke control areas within specific parts of the district. It doesn't have to cover the whole area. I mean, in terms of, I mean, just picking up on one of your points was that the wood fuel is a lot cheaper. That's a myth that we need to debunk, actually, because the amount of fuel, wood that it costs to heat your room that you would burn through in a wood burning stove would be more expensive than the equivalent gas usage. However, a lot of people with wood burning stoves in rural communities may well forage for their own wood, in which case it's free, but it's really damp and really polluting because they don't season it properly. So there's issues there, and that again, that forms part of the narrative, the consultation that we need to tease out. I take your point about topographical issues and temperature inversions. That's really getting into the science of it, but I take your point and how we might again factor that in. And then there's our policy of how we choose to deliver on our smoke control areas. So for some people, they may only have solid fuel as a central heating source. So we may choose not to actively or proactively enforce against those individuals. But as you've rightly pointed out, there are less and less of those type of scenarios around, but they still do exist. But
okay, just to finish off, previously, previous life, Sussex Air Quality Partnership that I worked with had a brilliant process where they had a mobile air quality monitoring caravan, wagon, call it what you will, and you could move us around. And I think there's merit in having that at our fingertips when you want to deploy, when you know there's an issue, whether it's an incident or whatever it might be. And I just wonder whether that's something that might be in your schema of thinking with your various partners.
So I am familiar with that. And I, as part of the Clean Air South, I'm directly linked now with the Sussex Air Partnership. I receive all their minutes and I know what they're doing. So that things have moved on a little bit insofar as there's a lot more low cost monitoring solutions on the marketplace now. So, for example, today, funnily enough, by coincidence, I was speaking with a company called AtmoTube, who have developed a what I would refer to as a dosimeter technology, where they can actually put it onto the person, so that you can't get more mobile than that. And actually, the level of sensors within those units now they're not as accurate as the full MCERT standard £25,000 bits of kit. Of course, they're not going to be, but they're very good at indicating local air quality in a sort of reference level, if you like. So it refers to that air quality is a lot better in that location than it is in this location. But the numbers are within about 85% accuracy of what they should be, what they are actually. So we're exploring that, because sticking something on a vehicle itself, unless you make it electric, you know, that's a narrative as well. So, yeah.
Councillor Ruffy.
Back to carrot and sticks, I guess, and also communication. You talked about the political will on things like smoke control areas, and that obviously means bringing the public with you. Everyone likes bonfire night, for example. I did read a horrific story just this week about the rise in lung cancer rates among young people, young women in particular, who've never smoked before, which is one of the fastest growing cancers, mainly being attributed to air pollution, for example. We've also had things like Ella's Law coming on board because of horror stories, and normally you need a certain amount of horror stories before you can start selling in the health benefits of positive interventions. And I guess the question is really how we are going about communicating more widely the agenda of cleaner air as a kind of a net positive for people. I know we have within our plan, we have embedded kind of healthier lives and healthier environments for people to live in. But I guess the question is how you can really bring that alive. I mean, obviously, when you have, say, a child dying of asthma and air pollution, or you have a child dying, for example, of mold in a house, it's very easy to put a face against it, give a name to the law, but actually to sell the kind of clean air as a kind of a net positive, or as kind of an aspirational thing, seems very, very difficult. And I don't know how the strategy is kind of incorporating that communications challenge.
It doesn't go into that level of detail. It just recognises that communication and how we communicate is key to the delivery of the strategy. I mean, just by way of example, as I think I made reference to the Burn Better campaign, we spent a lot of time thinking about how we can get the messaging across, because we all know if you say don't do something, you get a cohort of people that go, don't you tell me not to do that, I'm going to go and do it. You know, and that's just part of the human condition. So, you know, the green movement and the environmental movement it has to change and sell the benefit of that behavioural change, as opposed to being more commanding about how you should change. We mustn't adopt a patronising approach, and that will be very much part of the key sort of methodology and messaging over the course of the strategy.
And if I can just add to that, I mean, I think in some of the 13 strategic actions, I think there's some in there which are about engaging with communities, identifying locations, whether it's schools, etc., etc. That might include engaging with, you know, where you get a specific very active campaign group, like, you know, Mums for Lungs or something like that. And as members, you may well know of people, you know, people in your areas who are really pushing, you know, on the leading edge of that type of campaign. And, you know, as members, you could provide an introduction. We could engage, you know, the strategy could engage. But this is a strategy. It's a, you know, long-term thing. As you know, it's a science project. You know, as we measure and monitor more areas and identify places that maybe, as Councillor Lee mentioned, there are places where I think you call it temperature inversion places, and, you know, and valleys where you get that sort of problem. It's not dissimilar to a problem we used to have with North Wolves, where it was a gully and there was a concentration of particulates down there. So if there are places that there's a strong suspicion, and with hopefully some evidence to say, hang on, we need to have a look at that. As members, you know where those places are, you know what the talk is in your area, you know the people who are campaigning on it. We can try and plug those sort of things in and feed that into whatever monitoring we're doing and so on. But it's a strategy that will be a process that will evolve, and hopefully we'll get better at identifying the hotspots, so to speak.
Okay, I think we've had an hour and a quarter on that, so that was really useful discussion. Thank you for the presentation, David. Equally useful there. And thank you, Councillor Croyson, for seeing us through both of those presentations this evening. If there's no other questions, we'll draw stumps on those there and move on to agenda item 8, which is the HEP committee work programme for 25-26. And you'll have seen there that we have 2 items on the agenda for the 2nd of December, community grant programme criteria and climate adaptation, and 2 further items in February. I've just this afternoon had an email from Cheryl with 5 other items that are going to be put into the work plan for us, which are public spaces protection orders and enforcement, street scene operational delivery, community resilience and wellbeing strategy, VAT treatment on the leisure contract, and building a resilient waste service for the future. So I think all of that together will lead us to having a rather more robust work plan when we meet in December, I think.
Can I ask for clarification? It was mentioned the last HEP under the nature improvement plan as talk about a river improvement plan. Now, is that part of the nature improvement plan, or is that a separate aspect which you haven't mentioned?
I'm not aware of it being a separate thing.
It certainly was mentioned. It was a bit of a throwaway line, I thought, and I do know that Councillor Powell, Councillor Lerney, and Councillor White had this very conversation just the other day. So it's clearly in the wind.
Okay, it comes into what I was going to bring up after we've done the. But with those additions that I've just mentioned, is there any other comment on the programme as we've got it in front of us at the moment? So that's the formal programme. So we'll take that as accepted. That brings us to the end of the formal agenda as we have it. But what I said I would do at the beginning was raise with you the outcome of the meeting I had with the other 2 chairs of scrutiny committees, the scrutiny committee itself and the housing and economic policy group. And out of that, there's going to be 1 formal task and finish group under the full scrutiny committee, which is going to be looking at enforcement across the district and how that can be improved and certainly communicated better. We looked at 2 other issues that this committee were interested in last time out, one of which touches on that rivers plan, which was the current lack of incentive to householders to improve their ancient septic tanks and cesspits and install more modern sewage treatment plants, and so arrest the leaching of nutrients into our chalk streams. And that's something I know that's dear to Councillor Power's heart, and indeed Councillor Lee, I think you and indeed me, largely because the 3 of us, and I know some others of you have large chunks of our wards that are not on mains drainage, and this is really something we need to address. You know, it's relatively straightforward to get grants to move from oil boilers to heat pumps, but there aren't any grants available at the moment to rip out your septic tank and put a cladrister in. So that's something that we all recognise, the 3 chairs, that we as a city council don't have the power to magic an enormous sum of money to start a programme of incentives for that. But I think it's worth us getting together, or getting an interested group together to work up a sort of straw man paper that at the very least outlines the issues and possible ways forward that could be taken by central government, by this council, by Hampshire, or whatever the follow-ons to those councils are going to be. And the other subject was electric vehicle charging points, not necessarily just in the city, but in the district in total as well, and indeed the wider network availability to enable people to charge cars in rural areas, which I know, again, some of us will be very conscious that we have a situation where 2 neighbours can't both charge their cars at the same time, because you crash the whole of the Itchen Valley or the Meon Valley power supply. Indeed, it happened at 2 o'clock this morning. So those are two areas that, if you're content to do so, I'd quite like to get a small cross-party group just to, if nothing else, talk through the issues, and if we think it worth doing, draw up a couple of strawman papers that articulate those issues and possible ways forward. Now, if is there any dissent from that, or are we content to look at that? I think
I'll just clarify. So
Sure.
the EV charging is non-urban because, as I understand it, the current council's policy is to focus on that high 99%, i.e. the urban side, whereas the rural is what's lacking. And I think Gloucester Council has a EV cluster charging process, which I haven't read, but would perhaps lend and show and signpost the way maybe. But if it's rural, then absolutely, I think that's much.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking. That it would be, you know, we don't need to necessarily restrict ourselves to rural, but you know that would be one of the focuses. Right. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, another just a clarification for me. Something that we have discussed before as well is like the availability of EV charging to those without off-street parking, council tenants as well in that particular position. So if we were to look at that, I'd like the strategy to sort of be all-encompassing and includes those sort of categories too.
Yeah, I think my view would be at our first gathering, we would flesh out what the scope of the thing's going to be. Yeah. Councillor Bennett.
I was going to make exactly the same point that Councillor Latham just made.
Yeah, a similar point. I guess I've raised this a few times with regards to the fact that the provision for people in urban areas who don't have off-street parking is to go to often council-owned car parks, where we only have one provider at the moment who actually tend to charge a higher premium rate, which I've often found, actively bizarre that we charge slower but charge more and then put a parking fine on top. And that means that you're effectively charging a premium to the people who can least afford an electric car. So nowadays, if you do get yourself a used electric car of the sort that Steve was pointing out, but you don't have a driveway, you are paying effectively motorway premium fast, ultra rapid charging. And I feel there is a social inclusion aspect, which certainly is included within the rural charging, provision. So social inclusion, I think, would be the scope.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Well, okay. We'll move that forward by email offline. I was just going to say, may I presume that Councillor Lee, Councillor Miller, you would wish to be involved with both of those? And then from my Liberal Democrat colleagues, we'll sort out who would wish to be on each.
May I suggest, Councillor, that we approach this in the same way we have for the overview and scrutiny item on planning enforcement, in that officers could draft a template of what it could look like, factoring in some of the work that's already happening to support moving with pace and traction, if that is helpful.
I think what I'd like to do first is have an initial meeting where we scope out where we would like to go, and then yes, please, when we've established what our broad boundary is going to be, then yes, very much so, that will be appreciated. Okay, if there's nothing more, then thank you everybody very much indeed for this evening, and we'll see you next time.